This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 88 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Janelle Hardy all about how to write memoir. But first to last week's question, which was, how do you process your editorial notes? Val says, I go by edit and accept or tweak as needed. Sometimes I've started implementing a change she's suggested, then had to backtrack when I realised why it wasn't like that to begin with. Or I'll message her and ask questions. Usually she does a quick read through my comments before kicking it over to the proofreader for a final pass. You have to keep in mind that they're just suggestions and you have the final say, but everything is worth considering. You're paying an editor for a reason. Meg Jolly says, how does anyone? Lots of drinking and crying and swearing. Whoops. In fairness, I love my editors. They both have a wicked sense of humour, so we leave wee little note trails between us on the documents, and it makes me giggle, which definitely helps to lighten a laborious and sometimes endless seeming task. I'm truly appreciative of their insight. Always humbles me. There is always more to learn. I'm lucky to have found two great editors who understand my voice and don't try and change it. Carrie Hardisky said, I haven't had a professional edit yet. My CPs have been great though. I imagine I might want to actually cry when I hire an editor. I hope you don't. I hope you just, embrace it because they are there to help you improve. Holly Line says, I love my editor. I go through her comments and decide which suggestions to accept and which to not, but she's almost always on the money, so I've learned to trust her notes. And Eliana West says, I can't wait to listen to this. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate all of the comments. This week's question is, what would you call your memoir if you ever wrote one? And I'm sure many of you have no intentions of writing one, and that's fine. I'm sure many of you possibly have already written one. Some of you might want to. So just play the game. Let's play and be silly and sensible and philosophical and all of that good stuff. So yes, what would you call your memoir if you ever wrote one? Book recommendation of the week this week is thanks to Scott Kavanagh. Scott recommended and very, very kindly sent me a copy of Effortless, Make It Easier to Do What Matters Most by McKeown. And it's a bit of an arse-kicking, I'll be honest. So I am quite clearly burned out, which I'm sure I'm going to talk about in a minute, even though I am reluctant to admit that. But anyway, this book essentially gives you some tools in the form of questions to ask yourself about how to make things easier. And I underlined so much of it. I still need to go back and review the things that I've underlined so that I can make sure I'm embedding them. But it was an arse kick. It was like a pat on the back. It was, solidarity, but a short, sharp reminder that this doesn't have to be hard. None of this has to be hard. Hard isn't a badge of honor. Burnout isn't a badge of honor. Being a workaholic isn't a badge of honor, although I slightly disagree with that one. I love being a workaholic. But, he does make some excellent points. And yeah, I needed that message, so thank you, Scott. And I'm sure there are others of you that need the message that, this writing world, this writing career doesn't have to be hard. You can make it easier, not necessarily easy, but easier. So I really recommend, if anyone listening is a workaholic, I really recommend you go and read this book because, wow, thanks for the ass kick, Scott. Okay, Rebel Author Diary Anthology submissions are open, but not for much longer. We have only about a month left, so this is the final countdown. And yes, I now have that song in my head, and I'm so glad I didn't start singing that for you. But it is the final countdown, so if you have any intention of getting a story in, now is the time to get it written and get it handed in. This week I also did being very unhumble, but what I think is a really, really good interview with Christina Stanley. So Christina was on the show last week, but I also went onto her YouTube channel. And importantly, we discussed the difference between copy editing and structural editing. And it was a fascinating discussion. I think we both took stuff away from it as well. And yeah, if you've ever wondered the differences between different types of editing, this is for you. So I highly recommend you go and look at that. Now, I had something else I was supposed to share, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was. So I'm going to be really upset when I forget this and send it off. It's all submitted and I haven't included it. But anyway, hopefully whatever it was, I will be able to share it next week. In personal update, I have sent side characters to the editor, and I have crashed quite hard since then. I have had a number of health, very minor health things, but no less, they are health issues. And it's just a reminder to me that even though creatively I'm not burned out, there is actually only so much my body can take. And I need to slow down. You can probably hear it in my voice this week. It is a little bit deeper than normal. And it's just because I'm so tired, I suppose. I don't know. I feel like I need a holiday. That's what I feel like I need. But equally, I also have a launch to prepare for. So I can't exactly take a holiday right now. So yes, a few announcements then. I will be launching Side Characters on the 29th of July, and the pre-order will go up next week. So I'm sure I will start to talk about the book a bit more then. Pause for percolation and intellection just then. Okay, so I'm going to admit that I'm also... Admit it like it's something I've done wrong. No, I am going to... this is harder to confess than I thought because I don't know. I'm nervous. Anyway, right, okay. I am going to run a live masterclass as part of the launch of Side Characters. It's going to be a 1 hour teaching segment and then a segment for questions afterwards. There'll be lots of resources that you can download as part of it, and then afterwards I will upload it all into a place so that you can have the video, the audio, the transcript. The audio and transcript I will obviously do after the class, so that will take a couple of days, but I will bundle that up, and if you can't make it or if I sell out of places, then you'll be able to purchase that afterwards as well. And so yeah, it will be limited. I think the Zoom's capacity only has 99 spaces. I don't even know if I will fill 99 spaces. I might limit it to 50 spaces or 30 spaces just because I'm shitting my pants. But we'll see. Anyway, yes, I am actually genuinely super excited as well as terrified to do this because it's so nice to the senses course that I released first was all self-taught, run at your own pace, but what it will be is really nice to have that interaction and to have that live segment. So yeah, I am super excited about this masterclass, and if it goes well and if people are interested, then I am going to do a masterclass for each of the other books as well, all live. And then I can bundle them up for people who aren't able to make it or, didn't want to join the live. And so, yeah, I am super excited for this, and I'm super excited for the launch as well. This book clocks in just about, I think it's about 10k bigger than Prose, and Prose was a bit of a fucking tome. So I don't know what that makes Side Characters, but it's a beast. And I am excited to finally start sharing it with you, albeit also proper crapping it. I don't know why each successive book seems to create more pressure on me. But psychologically, I'm a wanker, and I'm horrible to myself. Like, I get to this moment and this time period between handing that book to the editor and then getting those first reviews in or publishing it, getting those first pre-orders in is terrifying. I'm like, what if I failed? What if I've forgotten how to write nonfiction? What, all of this nonsense. And so my critique partners, I feel terribly sorry for them, because they have to, dish out equal numbers of arse kicks to pats on the back, be like, it's fine, you did it, it's another good book. I'm like, oh, but is it? Anyway, I am sure you guys all know this ridiculous to and fro in your own brains, but I just wanted to be completely honest, because that is where I'm at right now. Yeah, I hate myself so much sometimes. I don't know why I do this to myself. I wish I didn't. Anyway, let's move on, because I feel like I'm waffling. Oh no, wait. I'll tell you what I'm doing next week. So next week is half term. And so I'm really not sure what I'm going to be doing. But what I do know is that with the other podcast, Next Level Authors, I am in the challenge to get my audiobook done by the end of June. So I will also be releasing the audiobook of 13 Steps to Evil some point in the next couple of months. We all know that the uploads to various platforms take various amounts of time. So yeah, I will not fail my challenge, so I will have that finished by the end of June. And once I have that finished, I'm then going to choose between prose and side characters. I still don't know which one. Oh, I think I was supposed to put a poll up in Facebook and I forgot. Anyway, yes, so I think my next week will be working on getting the pre-orders up for the book, and eventually I'll get the masterclass up as well, and I will be recording in the audio booth, and I will start to work on the marketing for side characters. And I will also, because I have all the time in the world, I will also read Victor, because I still haven't read the second book, because as soon as I'm like on top of the marketing for side characters, I am going to reopen Trey to do that final edit before I send it to the editor. So yes, that's where I am at this week. All right, that was my personal update. So next we have Rebel of the Week. The Rebel of the Week this week was Aime Sund. Aime says, when I was 4, it was in the spring. My brother was 6 months or so old. I was wholly unimpressed with him, and not so attached to my mum either. I got pretty upset about something and dragged my suitcase out of the closet, packed it up with my favourite things, and took it outside and sat on it at the end of the driveway for a really long time, waiting for my dad to come home so we could run away and leave mummy with the baby. I didn't make it until my dad got home. I was too impatient, I guess. I love that. I love that rebellion. I kind of love the kiddie rebellions. They're so cute. Even when we become older and adults, I still think it's super cute. We are really low on Rebel of the Week stories, so I would love you to send me a story. It genuinely can be any kind of rebellion, big, small, or somewhere in between. And if you don't have a rebellion, maybe your partner does, or your brother, or your sister. But yeah, please do send me a Rebel story. I really want to keep this segment going. So yeah, if you haven't ever done it, now is your chance. I don't bite mostly, so you know. You can email your Rebel story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or Instagram me at Sasha Black Author. No new patrons this week, but a big thank you to returning patron Cindy. A huge thank you to all my existing patrons as well. I hope you enjoyed the 1 minute of audio that I posted. Which was like a verbal kick up the arse from me. I had a proper cackle whilst I was recording it, and it's been pretty popular. So if you are a patron and you haven't checked it out, please do go and check it out. And if enough of you tell me you want them again, I will definitely record another one next month. If you'd like to support the show and get early access to all of the episodes, as well as bonus content like me giving you a kick up the butt, then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. All right, that is it from me this week. Let's get on with the interview. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author podcast. Today I am joined by Janelle Hardy. Janelle is the founder of The Art of Personal Mythmaking and the host of the Personal Mythmaking podcast. She teaches memoir writing as a tool to help make sense of past trauma, so you can rewrite the story into a personally empowering narrative. Janelle's approach combines her background in bodywork with her past teaching writing at York University and writing for local newspapers and magazines in Canada. Hello and welcome.
Hi, Sasha. I'm so happy to be here.
So, no, thank you for coming. So first of all, before I get you to tell everyone a little bit about your journey, what is bodywork?
Oh, yeah, maybe it means something different over where you are. Bodywork is just a general term for hands-on healing work. So massage is the most obvious form of bodywork. It can include acupuncture, craniosacral therapy, and then the version that I do is most popularly known as Rolfing. It's structural integration, so it's using deep tissue massage techniques to release fascia and movement lessons to bring you back into alignment.
Okay. I have a chiropractor who I adore and bends me into all kinds of shapes, and my father's partner does a lot of like massage and yoga, and she's just trained in a particular therapy that I cannot for the life of me remember, but like sort of works with, it's not Reiki, but yeah, I will think of it during the course of this anyway, and then I'll let you know. But anyway, okay, cool. So tell everyone a little bit about you and how you came to where you are today.
Okay, so I am in my early 40s now. I don't know why that came out first, but it's interesting because it feels like, oh, life does change as you get older. Things shift in the body and in circumstances. But I was born and raised in the far north of Canada. It's called the Yukon Territory, which is above British Columbia and beside Alaska on the lands of the Tonquachan and Kwanlundun peoples. And I kind of lead with that because being a Yukoner and then a Canadian has had a huge impact on my identity. And I love that area so much. I'm currently living in Vancouver, BC, but I'm a Yukoner through and through. And I think starting out living in a really remote place with real extremes of weather and sunshine, it's far enough north that it doesn't get dark in the summer and it's quite dark in the winter, really set me up to be a little bit out of step, or, you might say being a rebel in my life path. So I spent a lot of time doing studies in different things that didn't really seem to make sense to other people or be connected to each other, dance and anthropology, and also being super creative, always writing and painting and dancing, doing some choreography as well, and then getting training in bodywork and offering hands-on healing support to people. And through all of those experiences from my early 20s, I was also a solo parent, single mother, and often self-employed or juggling contracts. And so all of these things that I was doing and becoming that seemed to not make a lot of sense started to coalesce in my mid 30s and come together into what I do now, which is the Art of Personal Mythmaking, the transformational memoir writing course, and writing circles that I offer. And what I find really interesting about how I came to where I am now is that I could not have foreseen what I've created and the kind of work that I do. I couldn't have dreamed it up. But by continuing to follow the pull of interest and curiosity and my creative flow and my desire to support people in their healing journeys, as well as going down my own healing path by trusting and continuing to be kind of single-minded in following that pull, really not able to ignore it. There was this tipping point where I decided to offer some classes in my living room. One of them was an intuitive painting class, which I thought everyone would sign up for. No one signed up for it. Everyone being, I put posters up around town. I didn't even have a website, or maybe I had a website, but I didn't really know how to market at this point, besides posters on bulletin boards around town. This was about 6 years ago. And the other one was this idea. I was like, oh, personal myth making. And I didn't really know what it was, but it popped up in my mind, and I thought this would be fun to explore. And 4 people signed up for that course, and no one signed up for my intuitive painting course. And so the work that I'm doing now, about 6 years ago, started to show up in my teaching, and I just kept following the threads of working with personal life story. How do we support healing and transformation? Because that's really necessary when we're digging into our own previous experiences. And how can we make it fun and mythic as well? So
I think that's like a fascinating journey, and Canada is one of the places that is like top 3 on my bucket list to go to. Although I forget my geography is like embarrassingly bad. I feel like it's Victoria. Is that a place like somebody with lakes and mountains? Is that? Yeah. Anyway, I've seen some absolutely gorgeous lakes and mountains, and I just want to retire where there are lakes and mountains and like no people. So I'm pretty much sure I'm going to want to try and find a way to get a citizenship in Canada. Anyway, yes. So I love that journey. And I remembered it was called Resilo. That's the treatment that she works on now.
Oh,
anyway,
interesting.
So we are here. You've mentioned how you came to do the myth making career, but can we start at the beginning? Because lots of people hear about memoir, lots of people hear about biographies, autobiographies, and I don't think it's necessarily clear unless you are writing those things or reading them prolifically, what the differences are. So like what is the difference between memoir, biography, autobiographies? Let's start there.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So biographies are an account of someone's life written by someone else, and it's pretty linear from start to finish. They're often written about famous people, public figures, people where we might actually want to know all of the details, regardless of how interesting they are or whether they form a story or not. So you'll see a lot of biographies about significant people, whether living or dead.
I'm sure we will have, may he rest in peace, lots of biographies of Prince Philip coming out very soon in the UK.
For sure. Yeah. Then there's autobiography, which is like a biography. It's an account of your life written by yourself, but like biography, it's super linear. It's often running from the start to the finish. It includes all the details, maybe not all the details, but it tries to include as many details as possible. So it's more of a timeline story. Often, again, famous people, public figures, they might have an autobiography that's ghostwritten or sometimes written by them that is written to really serve the hunger of a public that wants to know everything about someone. And to be honest, I don't find biography or autobiography all that interesting. And I find memoir more interesting. And the reason is, with memoir, you're writing it about yourself. And it is a collection of memories and stories oriented around a theme that creates a story arc, but it's not meant to give a full account of your life. It does not have to be linear. It doesn't have to go from start to finish, year by year. it can be an opportunity to explore an interesting arc or phase or theme of your life, where you still don't actually know all that much about that person outside of the theme, if you're the reader, but you know a great deal about that person contained within that theme. And the cool thing about memoir is that memoirists can write more than one memoir, right? Because of the creative flexibility of orienting your stories and exploration around a theme rather than a straightforward linear account of your life.
So it's probably a massive cliche to say this, but the most famous example I can think of is, I'm guessing, Eat, Pray, Love is a memoir.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. So I didn't prep you for this question, but what do you mean by myth making? And is this related to, like, with memoir, I suppose there is a line between writing factual truth, whatever that is, versus like your personal truth, and then like truth in terms of story terms? Like, is that connected to myth making? Like, talk to me about those different types of truth and how, like, what that means in terms of myth making.
Yeah. So one understanding of myth is that it's a story that's not true. But another understanding of myth is that it's a story that may not be factually true, but has a lot of power to shape your understanding of yourself and the world around you. So examples of collective myths is patriarchy, that men are somehow better than women is a really obvious one. And so we get an opportunity when we start to examine myths culturally and societally, as well as internally, to rewrite those narratives, to reshape, because myth is powerful, right? Becoming mythic is creating a way of understanding yourself and being in the world that lifts you up into a truth about yourself, even if um, maybe factually you can't quite put your finger on it. So I can use a personal example to illustrate that. I was very shy for a long time as a teenager and into my 20s, the kind of shyness where you go bright purple in your face and get so tangled up in the anxiousness of trying to figure out how to participate in a conversation that you're just horribly awkward when you do get something out. And then if anyone pays attention to you or responds to you, like, then I would blush and then I'd shut down because of the blushing. And so it was really uncomfortable. And so I had this sort of story or myth about myself that I was too sensitive, that I was super shy, that I was socially awkward. None of those things are true anymore. And the reason they're not true is because I started exploring ways to untangle that little story about myself, little but powerful. I started learning how to heal shyness, because although I am introverted and although I am sensitive, there's no reason to stay stuck in this shyness that would shut me down. I started understanding that shyness can be related to a freeze response, which is part of an interrupted trauma response in the body and the nervous system, and learn how to work with that and thaw that freeze response. I started learning that high sensitivity is actually a thing. There's a name for people who are super sensitive and highly sensitive people, maybe also having empath tendencies, which is being able to really feel other people's emotional states. And in learning, unraveling, and doing my healing work, I've come to this understanding that I am sensitive and highly attuned to other people's emotional states. And I'm actually quite sociable, and I love people. Right? My mythology has gone from I'm super shut down and awkward and shy to my sensitivity is actually a gift, not a detriment. And as long as I'm paying attention to habits of shutting down, I can be myself in social situations and around people and enjoy it. So that reframe is like I'm rewriting a little myth about myself so that it becomes empowering rather than disempowering. I'm not saying that it's easy to do that, but it's really worthwhile. I'm so grateful that I'm not shy anymore. I know there's more to this question, but I figure I'll pause for a moment.
Yeah, I find this deeply fascinating because I definitely have written myths, like mental myths about myself. My wife and I make a bit of a joke because my wife is an introverted thinker, but a very social person. She is an absolute charmer, and that's what got me. She just charmed the pants off of me, literally and figuratively. And we've always had this sort of in joke that I am so socially awkward that I'm actually entertainment to watch in a room of people because I'm that like awkward. And yet I think I have not necessarily healed that, because I think it's getting worse the older that I get. But I found like I don't know what the word is, like a way around it. So one of the things, I'm highly competitive, like that is my number one strength on the like Clifton strengths thing. I am number one competition, and that means I will compete with myself. And so one of the things that I won't do is allow myself to defeat myself, like so I have to beat myself, which is contradictory to what I've just said, but I won't allow like fear to get in the way. So like I remember the first time I went to the London Book Fair, I was like physically gagging outside the venue because I just couldn't bring myself to walk into a venue with 25,000 people in it. Yeah, I know, right? And but I did it, and I continue to do it, and I continue to network, and I have a huge network now, but that doesn't mean it's not terrifying. And yeah, so anyway, I don't necessarily think I've healed myself, but I've definitely found some workarounds.
You've found a great strategy, and I mean that's a great story to have about yourself, that you're competitive and and you
but to use it as a strength
whenever it works, right?
Exactly.
To turn it into a strength and then figure out how to integrate it into the rest of your life.
Exactly. How many people can I talk to this time, even though I don't want to talk to anyone, no. So yeah, let's go back to like the other side of the question, which is what is that line between writing factual truth, your personal truth, and then like truth in terms of story arc and story terms? Like, how does that work with memoir?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that a little bit, and I came up with a little example to try to illustrate it. So, a factual truth for me: my parents had to give my beloved dog away when I was 12 years old. That's a fact. It's also a fact that they told me that they had to give the dog away, that they found a home for him. A home that was out of town. Our dog was not neutered, and he just kept running away and causing trouble in the neighborhood. And so there were good reasons why my parents had to give the dog away. They found a good home for him. Those are all facts. But my personal truth at the age of 12, with a dog that I had raised up and trained since I was 10, that I loved so much, my personal truth was that I felt incredibly betrayed by their decision. Even though now I understand their reasons as an adult, that didn't matter as a 12-year-old. So the story truth, if I wanted to write a short story about this, for me would be about betrayal and loss, as illustrated by my dog being given away by my parents. However, if my parents were to write about that same factual truth, their story truth, their personal truth, or one of my parents, the personal truth would not be feeling betrayed, and their story truth would not be about betrayal and loss. Their story truth would more likely be about having to make a very grown-up and painful decision that they knew would hurt me and my three siblings, right? So the same factual truth explored by different people is going to be very different as a story.
That's I find that so fascinating, and I almost wish there were memoirs about the same time, the same memories from different people's point of views, because I think that would be such a fascinating insight into like my background is psychology, so I can't help
Yeah.
but wonder about the psychology of that. But yeah, I love that. Thank you for explaining that. So let's rewind a step. What is the basic structure of a memoir book, and how does that differ in terms of other types of story structure?
Well, so a memoir structure, if you're thinking of working with a personal truth that becomes a story, that you're exploring theme, typically heading towards a narrative arc of transformation. And this is in part because of my lens is transformative experiences and supporting transformation, but the structure will be a transformational arc in a story.
Oh, okay. So literally the same as like a normal story, in terms of like a protagonist having a character arc.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's the easiest, most familiar way to work with memoir. Um, and and I usually just stick with the familiar with story. But there are, in terms of form, many different options. And I also think it's important to consider that that regular structure of I'm telling a story by illustrating an experience to show some sort of learning that I've had, uh, is quite a cultural construction of what we consider to be interesting story. And so there is opportunity to just consider, do I actually want to tell that kind of story about myself? Do I want to structure my story in that classic form, which is super engaging? Or um, and I think that it's useful to consider that not everyone that wants to write memoir actually wants to publish. So if you take out the imperative to try to make money and try to build an audience and all of those other pressures that come along with publishing, if you strip that away and you just consider what are the stories about myself that I want to share, um, not necessarily to publish, but to share perhaps with two loved ones, or, to wait until significant people in my story have died so I don't hurt their feelings, and then share with descendants, you end up getting a little more freedom to think about, okay, well, maybe I don't have to orient all my stories around transformation, but maybe I can orient my stories around what is super delightful for me. What I'm just randomly offering examples right now, but maybe making art, or let's say sewing. I'm thinking of my mom. Making art and sewing has been a driving force. Creativity as the orienting structure in one's life. How fun would it be if you're just writing for yourself to simply explore that kind of thread?
I have never thought of, I think it's because I'm so stuck in the indie world and doing this as a career and making money from it, that I never considered memoir not for publication. But I suppose in a way, I spent most of my youth up until the time that I went to university journaling. I mean, I literally have dozens and boxes in my loft of journals, which is in a way, I suppose, a form of early memoir. But yeah, and I suppose, yeah, I mean, come on, we all know that writing is healing. And so I just can't believe I never thought of that. And I now kind of want to go away and write about some things that happened, but good and bad, and what they meant. And yeah, I feel very inspired right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I literally thought that would be one genre I would never write about. But that I have this post-it. Actually, I have this post-it twice on my computer because it's so important to me, which says, "You have permission." And I, like, even though I'm a rebel, like, so often I have to give myself permission to do something because, oh, there's this word again, but, you know, I build up these bullshit myths in my head that, you know, I have to do something this way because it's always been done that way, or I can't do this, or I can, you know, whatever. And yeah, I guess I have permission to write things that I'm not going to publish, which is bizarre because of course I do. But yeah. So thank you for giving me permission for that. I will take that away.
You're welcome. I want to share just like one more little inspiration. I have this collection of different kinds of memoir, which is really fun because there's so many ways that you can create form in published memoir as well. But one of the books, or it's a trilogy that I love so much, is James Herriot's stories about being a veterinarian in northern England on the border, I think, of England and Scotland in the 1920s, a large veterinarian. And I mean, clearly this is published, but what I find so interesting is that he didn't set out to write memoir. It's a little more linear because as a young man around 20, he graduated from veterinarian school and then ended up with this job in a small village working with all the farmers' animals and their pets as well. And he ended up writing little articles for the local paper, and people loved his storytelling so much that the syndication grew, and eventually he ended up publishing these books. So the books are just story by story, week by week, his absolutely delightful little adventures living his life. You know, like we can be just happy, delightful storytellers. There's still an element of considering how to tell a story really well and describe the circumstances, but it doesn't have to be this big dramatic book. It can be just a series of little stories within someone's bigger life story that are intended to delight and entertain and just kind of bring someone along in the flow of their life without aiming towards a big message or a big lesson, you know?
And I think that's such a wonderful reminder to be present in the moment because, you know, unless you're present in the moment, you don't see the little joys in life or the little moments that happen. And it's funny, isn't it? Because when families get together, and they haven't been together for a while, it's always the anecdotes that you're sharing, and it's actually rarely the big dramas that happened in, you know, in the past that people talk about. It's the time that, you know, my wife's sister spray painted my wife's name in the garage on the garage wall, and then tried to get her in trouble, except that my wife's dyslexic, so at the time she couldn't spell her name, and so the dad knew it was her sister. You know, it's little anecdotes. Like, that's one of my favorite stories that they tell, and every time they get back together they tell that story and everybody loves it. And it's just like these tiny moments that you know, yeah, I feel very what's the word, not reflective, nostalgic, I think is the word I'm looking for right now. Yeah, like, and I feel like I've had a reminder to appreciate those small things that happen, like day to day, because you can tell a wonderful story about those little things that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of your tools to help a writer deal with what can be, I suppose, overwhelming memories? Because obviously a lot of memoir, often people write about trauma that's happened and like their healing and where they are now. So what tools or methods do you have to help writers dealing with those kinds of memories?
Yeah, because of my background in hands-on healing work, my approach is really body centric. So, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that most contemporary cultures these days, certainly English speaking cultures, are very much in their heads all the time. We're really taught, certainly I'm speaking as a Canadian woman, but we're really taught to think and rationalize and intellectualize and prioritize our thinking processes, our cognitive functions, and we're rewarded for that. And from a young age, we are simultaneously shamed out of really being in our body, being joyful in movement. We're also, most schools involve far too much sitting still. So we're taught from a young age to shut down our body's impulse to move, which is actually very healthy. And movement helps with our cognitive function, but we're not taught taught that. And so by the time we reach adulthood, many of us, especially I think creative introverts, a lot of creative work does involve sitting and working on the creative work, or being more still. We're really good at being in our heads, and we've learned how to not feel or pay attention to a lot of what's going on in our body. Part of that process of learning how to ignore our physical impulses also teaches us how to ignore a healthy trauma response and allow that cycle to come to completion. So an example would be if you get in a car accident and you're okay, but the shock is there, your trauma impulse, healthy trauma response would be, because it's a shock to the system and you need to try to keep yourself safe, will be to either fight or run, flight. And if neither of those options are available, often it will be then you'll kind of freeze up. And then after those responses are expressed, there is a discharge of that. And the discharge is actually what gets shut down, because it often looks like crying, laughing uncontrollably, talking or kind of babbling, or a lot of shaking, panicky, or just behavior that seems more animalistic to people watching you, and often to yourself, because of how we've been taught to respond to these responses. And if that is a threat to social functioning, which it usually is, we'll be taught to shut that down, because our brains are so powerful, by holding it in, by trying not to cry, by trying to control any shaking, which is a real shame, because those responses are actually what will reset our nervous system so that we're not stuck in the trauma state. But when we learn how to shut these responses down for small traumas, as well as big ones, when we habitually learn how to shut it down, by the time we're adults, we're in a state where the shutdown is our kind of default reflex. And then things can get more stressful. And specifically to writers and creatives, how that often expresses itself to you is procrastination, overwhelm,
Wow.
scatteredness, self-doubt. A lot of these resistance states and creative blocks are actually shiftable by tending to your body and your nervous system, because they're related to a suppressed trauma response, in my opinion and my experience, which means that if we are trying to work with writer's block, through all the tips and techniques that are useful tips and techniques, but never address our body and our nervous system, we're not ever going to get very far. And so, to kind of tie that back into your original question, when people want to write about themselves, they're often surprised, especially if they're really stuck in the head, that they're having confusing responses, pins and needles, or shifts of temperature, or panic, or shakiness when they enter into a story, even a story or experience they thought they left behind and healed from. If our nervous system doesn't agree with us, our nervous system gets a chance through our body responses to tell us that we have not yet healed what was being held onto, because if there's a charge from a trauma response in our system, our nervous system does not understand time the same way that our minds do. So even if it happened 20 or 30 years ago and you're thinking, well, that's ancient history, but your body is saying, no, it's not. I've been holding this every day and it's still real to me. And so what happens when people don't have much knowledge about these responses is it can be really scary because it seems strange, not natural, even though it is natural. So, if it's scary, people are worried about talking about the responses and also don't know what kind of help to seek out. Um, and maybe the fear of being re-traumatized really comes up and it feels too overwhelming. So people back away from working with their life stories for that reason. And I've had students confess to wanting to write their memoir, but not doing it for 10, 20, even 35 years, in part because of creative block and in part because of not knowing how to work with the painful parts of their life story without support.
I find this fascinating, not least from the psychological perspective and how connected our bodies are with our minds. We are always told that our brains are super powerful and you know that they are connected, and that's why meditation is so good. And yet, as a Brit, stiff upper lip, darling, you know. And I know that's a cliche, but it is actually still true. And you know, we are told to have a stiff upper lip, and I make a joke constantly about being dead on the inside, which is like, I laugh about it, but it's actually not funny. It's actually terrible. You know, we and one of the things that I'm trying very hard to do with my son is to allow him, not allow, that's the wrong word, to encourage him to have his emotions and to share his emotions, because in Britain especially, and you know, I'm sure this is the case for other countries as well, but you know, our men aren't allowed to cry, they're not allowed to, you know, they just, all they have is this sort of rage or normal bog standard emotion. I don't want that for my son. I want him to be able to cry if he gets upset because you know, Dory can't find Nemo or whatever. You know, and for him to know that that's okay. Yeah, so I find this fascinating. All right, one of the things that I have read is that you swear by outlining your memoir using a fairy tale or using fairy tales to help one identify key themes in their story. So like, wait, what? Like, why fairy tales? And how can somebody use that to help them construct their own memoir?
Oh, I love that you're asking this. I actually have a free on-demand workshop, by the way, on how to outline your memoir using fairy tales, which I'll happily share that link at the end of the call, because that workshop is the foundational workshop to my work with people and to my course. So fairy tales, I use fairy tale because it's the most commonly understood word, but really what I'm talking about are ancient tales, which includes fairy tale, myth, folklore, fables, even family lore, any sort of story that has lasted more than a generation and that doesn't originate from literary sources, that actually originates from oral history. So the reason for this is that these stories carry some potency to them. They're powerful enough, whatever the story is about, that they're being passed down from generation to generation. Some fairy tales have actually been traced back to as old as 4,000 years, which is really quite phenomenal when you think about it. And so we can consider that these stories carry story arcs, narrative arcs that are very resonant, or they wouldn't continue to be passed down. They carry archetypal symbolism through the literal symbols in the stories, but also in the characters. So there's an archetypal power to a certain kind of personalities and characters. And when people resonate with a story, and then they start to work with it. So we'll just say it with a fairy tale. They start to work with it. Invariably, what happens is there are really powerful clues in that fairy tale that can guide someone when they're wanting to write a memoir and they're not entirely sure what their memoir is going to be about. And I really encourage people, even if they have a clear idea, to be open to the fact that as they work with their life stories and do their healing work, the story might change shape. It might not be the story they think they're going to tell, but the story that gets uncovered is going to be powerful. And because in all of our lives, we have so many stories and so many different themes and experiences we could explore, it's quite overwhelming if you just dive in without any sort of structure. And I find that starting by identifying a fairy tale that you really resonate with, and that could be because you really like the story. It could also be because you don't like the story, but your attention keeps getting called to it. That's a clue right there. That story, when you start to work with it in relation to your own life stories, will offer some discernment in terms of a handy narrative arc, symbolism, and characters that you can choose to explore. And then as you're generating story, it helps with, okay, these stories and memories belong with this theme, and these other ones that are showing up don't clearly belong. So I'm just going to set them aside for my next memoir, let's say.
I love a fairy tale, but I also love really dark fairy tales, though. So I don't know what that says about me. But yeah, that's fascinating. I never thought about, marrying a fairy tale with like personal history or personal memory. So I think that's fascinating. Memoirs need to be authentic, right? They are about us. They're about aspects of our lives and our own personal truth. So that can mean including the shit that we're ashamed of. And I know, is it Brené Brown talks about shame. And one of the things that I try very hard to do is not be ashamed of anything, and I try to be really honest on this podcast and share the highs and the lows and the embarrassing moments and the failures, but that's really fucking hard. And so how do you do that in a memoir? How can you include the stuff that you're ashamed of, or that you aren't proud of, or that you made a mistake? Because I think that probably is quite important to have that, because our truth is made up of both the things that we did right and the things that we did wrong, and the decisions that we made along the way. So yeah, like how do you make peace with that and include it and write it and still be authentic and truthful?
Well, I'm from a storytelling perspective. Perfect characters are not very interesting, are they?
Very true.
So having some humility and willingness to share the darker or uglier sides of ourselves is good for storytelling. It's good for relatability, and it just means we're human. None of us are perfect. I'm remembering right now, last summer I read Mary Carr's first memoir, which is called The Liars Club. It's kind of it's known to be a classic. And having heard it's a classic in the memoir genre, I got curious. I was like, okay, I need to read this. I was staying at my mom's for a couple months, and it was so funny and the Liars Club is, okay, the Liars Club is a pretty tight time frame from the age of 7 to 9. And a lot of it is about her life with dysfunctional parents as a child. But what was so funny, and which is what prompted me to start reading the book aloud to my mom, and we ended up reading the whole thing that way, because it was hilarious. And the reason it was so hilarious was in part because she didn't shy away from telling stories about her childish bad behavior. And there's this just enchanting scene where she's on an airplane being sent back to her dad after being with her mom, with her older sister for a while. And it's in the middle of the night. Everyone on the airplane is asleep. She's got this Barbie in her hand, and the man in front of her tilted his seat back, and all she can see is his shiny bald head. And she just goes through this hilarious and devastating scene where she hits his head with her Barbie so hard that the Barbie's head pops off and disappears. And the guy wakes up, and like it's a disaster of naughty childish behavior. And if she hadn't included those moments, she just wouldn't have been as interesting.
Oh, I think that's hilarious. I think that's absolutely hilarious. I have written down the Liars Club just because now I want to read it and have a giggle at her naughty childish behavior.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a tough story too, but her sense of humor and her willingness to be a naughty young human just makes it such an awesome memoir.
So there's one other, I think, really important question that I need to ask, because memoir is obviously like real. I say real, because we've talked about truth and what truth is, but that brings a problem when you are writing about other people. So how do you avoid, legal terms when the majority of fiction books have that sort of copyright legal blurb in the front that says all characters are fictitious and not, like of a human, whatever it is. Anyway, and so how do you avoid those legal issues? Because obviously, if you're writing memoir, then it is quite clear that you are writing about real people in your novel, and not everybody is going to agree with your truth. So yeah, talk to me about that.
Okay, so just a little disclaimer first. My specialty is really in supporting people in getting to the first draft of their memoir and in offering the healing and transformation that helps them get their first draft generated. So I do not teach getting to publication, partly because there are so many great people out there teaching that. I don't need to figure that out and teach it. But it is a really big question that needs to be considered if you want to publish. And it is also a question that can stop people from starting. So what I typically say to my students, this question comes up all the time, is don't plan to publish first. You're writing your first draft to really examine your life and explore it and write it for yourself only. If you can give yourself permission and commit to not sharing or showing it to anyone else, and take away any self-censoring that might stop you from writing, that's a huge gift that you can do. And just write the damn thing for yourself, get out all your petty grievances, work through the big feelings that might be getting in the way of a really good story, right? Or work through the big feelings that need to be part of the story when you start revising. But just don't think about that until you've actually gotten a lot of your stories on paper. Then there's the circling back around and revising and deciding what stays and what goes, and also touching on the ethical issues, not just the legal issues, but the ethical issues of if you want to publish, can you live with the consequences of hurt feelings, estrangements, and being shut out of community or family that might happen? Of course, this really depends on everyone's personal story. With the example of Mary Carr's The Liars Club, there's this incredibly beautiful introduction where she talks about how her mom doesn't show up in a good light. Her parents were both battling addictions in the Liars Club and were not necessarily the best parents. But her mom also gave Mary full permission to write her experience and not to get in the way of that. Not everyone who's going to be portrayed in a bad light is going to give that permission, but every circumstance is individual. So there's a point at which it will be really important to consider, do I want to publish, and what will the consequences be? Have I stayed so true to my own story, my own truth, and the facts, as well as my understanding, that no one can argue with me about that? That's one way to keep things really clean. And then there's a point at which you don't really have control over how people will react. It might be the people you think are upset won't be upset, and it might be that people that you thought you presented in a praiseworthy light will be upset because they don't see it the same way. So it's really hard to know, but I really encourage people to not let those worries and fears stop them from at least writing their first draft.
Yeah, especially because it will be like after everything we've talked about, I can see how healing and like cathartic that would be. If for no other reason than I know when I was journaling, getting that shit out, I always used to do it before bed, would mean I'd sleep better, because I didn't keep it, like you were saying earlier, all, you know, repressed and shut down, like in my brain and in my body.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is the Rebel Author podcast. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Well, I'm a fairly quiet, introverted person. My rebellious moments aren't loud and obvious and dramatic, but I do think the life choices I've made have been quite rebellious. I've chosen to be single more often than partnered, particularly with raising my daughter. The rebellious part of me said, nope, I don't want to be with someone badly enough to be with my daughter's father with the behavior that was going on. And I would rather do this myself under my own rules, my own will for a life with my daughter. So, and that, and then the other kind of rebel moment was the series of decisions of following the threads of things that didn't make sense, and then creating my course and continuing to follow the threads of creating something with no real guidance in my life of entrepreneurship or how to create something like a transformational online course, and cultivating the skills, but also trusting that things were going to become and evolve outside of what I could anticipate. Which for me, I do worry a lot. And so looking back, sometimes I think, wow, how was I able to do this? I think it was this little inner rebel that got around my tendency to worry and want security.
Oh, I love that. I genuinely feel like our education system, and obviously I'm talking specifically about the British one because I can't speak for other countries' education systems, but I do feel like we fail our kids because, you know, we have all of these curriculums that are so wildly important, and yet we don't really teach them entrepreneurship. We don't really truly teach them what creativity is. I genuinely feel like creativity is suppressed by the time we get to adulthood, and that's not just schools. I think that is, society at large. But I have always wondered why, that more business entrepreneurial side of life isn't part of our curriculum, because so many people go on to run their own businesses, and none of us we're all just fucking making it up as we go along because nobody's ever educated us, and there is no program of education on that, and yet so many of us do it. But yeah, I love that rebellion and how empowering it was, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, tell everyone where they can find out more about you, your books, courses, anything else that you would like to add.
Yeah, so you can find everything that I do on my personal website, which is janellehardy.com. That's JANELLEHARDY.com. You can also find my free on-demand Outline Your Memoir workshop at that website, or by going to personalmythmaking.com/on-demand, something like that.
Awesome. Well, I'll also make sure that the links are in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And of course, a gigantic thank you to all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, then you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. And of course, a giant thank you to everybody listening. I'm Sasha Black, you are listening to Janelle Hardy, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. That's it for this week. Make sure you join me next week when I'll be joined by Ginny Carmichael, and we'll be talking about author websites, how to build them, the things that you need to include, not include, mistakes to avoid, and all of that good stuff. Don't forget that the Rebel Author Diaries submission window only has about a month left, and so please do get in your stories, and don't forget to send me your Rebel stories. I need them. I want this to continue. So yes, please do send me your Rebel Author stories. Okay, and I will catch you next week. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.